The silence of the house was louder than any storm I had ever known. Maggie Ellis sat in her late husband's old armchair, the one with the cracked leather arms and the seat that still held his shape. Her fingers rested lightly on a worn photograph, a younger version of herself, Henry smiling beside her, their son between them with baby Ethan in her arms. Lily hadn't been born yet. That picture felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The clock ticked on the wall, too loud in a house that once held Sunday laughter, jazz humming low from the kitchen, and children's feet running wild across hardwood floors. Now, the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves outside and the creak of her own breath. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Fall had come early this year, or maybe it just felt colder because Henry wasn't there to fill the space beside her. The days since his passing had blurred together in quiet routines, making grits for the children before school, folding laundry that wasn't hers, tucking little bodies into bed while hiding her own grief behind bedtime stories. She didn't cry in front of them. She couldn't. Ethan was watching too closely and Lily asked too many questions. Some nights Maggie would sit at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done, just staring at the steam rising from her tea, trying to feel something other than the ache in her chest. She had always believed that faith could carry her through anything. But faith doesn't pay mortgages, and it doesn't answer hard questions like, "Grandma, are we staying here forever?" There was so much she didn't say, so much she couldn't. A knock at the front door cut through the stillness. 3 firm knocks, not the children, not the neighbors. They didn't visit much these days. She rose slowly, bones protesting, and opened the door. There stood Evelyn, her daughter-in-law, in a sleek coat, heels on the porch like she was too polished for the red dirt beneath her feet. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were cold. "In or out, Evelyn?" Maggie asked quietly. Evelyn stepped inside without answering. She held a manila envelope in one hand, thin but heavy. "We need to talk," she said, "about the will." Maggie's heart didn't race. It didn't break. It just slowed. Of course it was about the will. It always is. Evelyn placed the envelope on the coffee table like it was something holy. Maggie didn't touch it. They sat across from each other in the same living room where Maggie used to rock Ethan to sleep, where family birthdays were celebrated with pound cake and gospel on the radio. But today, the air was thin, like truth had sucked the oxygen out of the room. "I spoke with the lawyer this morning," Evelyn began, crossing one leg over the other. Her heels tapped once, sharply. "Henry's will has been reviewed. The house, the savings, the land, they were all listed in his name only." Maggie blinked, slowly. "And?" Evelyn exhaled, annoyed already. "And according to the documents, he left the property to his son, my husband, which means everything now falls to me, as his widow." The words landed like ice water. Not loud, not violent, just cold. Maggie looked at the envelope. "You're saying he left me nothing." "I'm saying it's complicated," Evelyn replied, tilting her head with false sympathy. "I know this has been your home for years, but legally—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Maggie reached for the envelope, opened it, and read slowly. Every line confirmed it. No mention of her name, no share, no protection. "I cared for him," Maggie said quietly, setting the papers down. "Even when he stopped remembering my name, I cleaned him. I fed him when you wouldn't visit. And now you tell me he left me out like I was nothing." "I'm not the villain here," Evelyn said quickly. "I'm just doing what the law says. I have children to think about, too." "They're my grandchildren," Maggie said, voice trembling. "I've been raising them while you—" "Don't," Evelyn interrupted, standing. "Don't act like I'm the bad mother here. I gave you space. I let you stay here out of respect." Maggie rose too, slower but steadier. "You didn't let me stay. I stayed because this is my home, because they need me." Evelyn leaned in, her voice dropping low. "You're not going to win this, Margaret. You can pray all you want, but you can't pray your way into owning what doesn't belong to you." Then she turned, heels clicking, and walked toward the front door. As she reached it, she pulled out her phone and made a call. Maggie didn't mean to listen, but her words echoed off the hallway walls. "She won't last long," Evelyn whispered. "Trust me, she's breaking." The door closed behind her. Maggie stood alone in the quiet again. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stared at the papers on the table, white pages with black ink that erased 50 years of marriage, devotion, and sacrifice. And for the first time since Henry died, Maggie felt something sharper than grief. She felt betrayal. Maggie stepped into Turner's Market just after 9. She always came early. Fewer people, fewer eyes. She pulled her sweater close and pushed the old shopping cart, its wheels squeaking slightly with each turn. Canned goods, bread, milk, peanut butter. Ethan liked it with honey. She moved without a list, but her hands knew what to reach for. She could feel them watching. The cashier didn't speak when Maggie entered. Neither did the woman by the produce aisle, the one who used to bring sweet potato pie to church socials and call Maggie sister. Now her eyes slid away like Maggie was made of something contagious. Maggie kept her head high. She had learned long ago the power of silence, but even silence has weight. And today, it pressed on her. At the back of the store, near the meat counter, she overheard 2 women talking low. They didn't say her name, but they didn't have to. "She's still in that house? After what happened?" "I heard it was never really hers." "Well, that girl of hers, Evelyn, she's got a good head on her shoulders, doing what's right. She's too old to raise those kids anyway." Maggie turned down the next aisle before they saw her. Her hands shook as she picked up a jar of applesauce. Too old, never really hers. They said it like she was just a shadow left behind. At the checkout, the young clerk scanned her items without making eye contact. Maggie reached for her purse, but paused when she saw a familiar figure behind her, Mrs. Clara Jenkins. She'd lived 2 streets over for years. They used to sit on each other's porches in the summer, sipping sweet tea and talking about church and grandkids. Clara didn't smile, but as Maggie finished paying and began to walk away, Clara stepped forward, quiet, careful, and slipped something into Maggie's coat pocket. Then she turned her face and said barely above a whisper, "I didn't see nothing. God sees all." Maggie said nothing. She left the store and walked the 2 blocks home, her bags heavy, her steps slow. Once inside, with the door locked behind her, she set the groceries down and reached into her pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, no name, no explanation. Just 7 words, written in a rushed, uneven hand. "You need to look at the deed." Maggie stood still, the paper trembling in her fingers. She looked out the window toward the edge of the property, where the old shed stood, the one Henry never let her go near. And for the first time since he died, she felt something more than sadness. She felt suspicion. The house was quiet again by evening. The groceries had been put away, dinner served, dishes washed. Maggie moved through the motions like breath. Automatic, quiet, invisible. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a pencil in hand, chewing the eraser. His 4th grade homework lay untouched in front of him, numbers blurring together in a crooked line. "Need help, baby?" Maggie asked gently, drying her hands on a towel. He shook his head. "I'm just tired." Maggie nodded, but she knew it wasn't about the homework. He'd been quieter these past weeks, watching everything, listening more than a boy should. She poured him a glass of warm milk, just like Henry used to do when their son was small. Across the room, Lily danced in her socks, twirling to a melody only she could hear. Her voice hummed softly, a made-up tune about butterflies and flowers. Maggie smiled faintly. Lily didn't yet feel the cracks in their world, but Ethan did. He looked up suddenly, eyes wide and too serious for 10 years old. "Grandma," he said, "are we going to lose our home?" The question dropped like a stone. Maggie sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't answer right away. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to say everything would be fine, that God would provide, that adults keep children safe. But lies were heavier than truth these days. "We're going to do everything we can to stay," she said softly. Ethan looked down. "Mom said you can't afford it." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Your mama's going through her own storm, baby. People say things they don't always mean when they're hurting." He didn't believe her. She could see it in his face. "She said you were just staying here for now, that we might move in with her." Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. The idea of those children living under Evelyn's roof, controlled by her bitterness. It made her stomach turn. "You don't need to worry about that tonight," she said. "Come on, let's get you all ready for bed." Upstairs, she helped Lily into her pajamas, the ones with the yellow stars she loved. Maggie brushed her curls out gently, fingers moving through the soft tangles with care. "Grandma?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Yes, baby." "Why don't we see Grandpa in dreams like other people do?" Maggie paused. "Maybe he's still watching over us from a place we can't see. Maybe he's quiet like me." Lily nodded like that made sense and curled up under the quilt. Ethan climbed into his bed on the other side of the room, eyes already closed but not yet asleep. Maggie kissed their foreheads. "Good night, my loves." Back downstairs, Maggie stood in the hallway. The silence was thick. The envelope from Evelyn still sat on the table, untouched since that morning. But her mind drifted elsewhere. "Look at the deed," the note had said. Instead, she walked toward the den, a room Henry never let anyone enter after he got sick. The door creaked open. Dust lay thick across the desk. Bookshelves lined the walls, most of them untouched for years. A faint scent of pipe smoke still lingered, ghost-like. She moved slowly, trailing her fingers across the desk. Then something caught her eye. A drawer slightly open. She pulled it, expecting nothing. Inside, under a stack of old receipts, was a letter. Yellowed, folded twice, with her name on it, Margaret. She sat down. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first line read, "If you are reading this, it means I failed to protect you." Maggie held the letter as if it were a flame. Something too hot to touch, too painful to let go. She sat in the stillness of Henry's old den, the paper trembling in her hands. The lamp cast a soft golden glow across the room, illuminating the dust that danced in the quiet air. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. "Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I failed to protect you. I never wanted it to come to this, to leave you alone with pieces I never fully confessed. I made mistakes, big ones. There are things I never told you about the house, about the land, about Evelyn." Maggie's stomach turned. Henry had never been a man of many words, especially in his last years. His silence had grown heavier with each passing month. But this was a voice from beyond, clear and sorrowful. "Years ago, when I put the deed in our son's name, I did it to keep it out of the government's hands. I thought it was a temporary thing. I thought I'd fix it later. I never did. I trusted Evelyn to do right by you. I believed she loved our son enough to keep our family safe. But I see now that was foolish. She's not who I thought she was." Maggie felt her chest tighten. She could see him now, sitting at the same desk, hands shaking as he wrote these words. The same man who used to pray over their children's beds. The same man who had held her hand through 1,000 Sundays. "I kept papers, real ones, proof of what I owned and what I meant to pass on. They're not in the lawyer's files. I didn't trust him either, not after I saw him meeting with Evelyn without telling me. You'll find what you need behind the wood panel under the bookshelf. Left side, third shelf from the bottom. I hope you never have to use it. But if you do it for Ethan and Lily. Do it for what's right. Forgive me." Maggie read the letter 3 times. Forgive me. She closed her eyes, holding it against her chest, as if she could press his voice into her skin. She didn't cry. Not yet. But the ache inside her had changed. It was no longer just grief. It was purpose. She stood, walked to the bookshelf slowly, knees stiff from age and emotion. She knelt down, reached behind the 3rd shelf from the bottom, and felt along the back paneling. Her fingers brushed a loose board. She pressed gently. It gave way with a soft pop. Inside was a flat, wrapped bundle, old manila folders tied with a string, sealed with dust and time. She brought it to the desk, unwrapped it carefully. Deeds, bank records, an original copy of the property title with both their names, dated before Henry's illness, a handwritten note listing passwords, and something else, a notarized document with Evelyn's signature. Maggie's breath caught. It was a quitclaim deed. Evelyn had signed away her rights to the house. The date was 2 years ago. Maggie leaned back in the chair, stunned. Evelyn had known. She'd known all along. Everything. The cold visits, the controlling tone, the envelope with nothing inside, had been a performance, a lie. And the lawyer, he must have known too. Maggie sat in silence, heart pounding. The truth wasn't just buried. It had been hidden on purpose. She looked toward the hallway where Ethan and Lily now slept, unaware of the fire that had just sparked inside their grandmother. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for justice. The next morning brought no sun, only gray skies and wind pressing against the windows like it wanted in. Maggie sat at the dining table with the folder of documents beside her, untouched since the night before. She hadn't slept. Her body ached from the weight of what she now knew. She was still staring at the papers when a car pulled up in the driveway. She didn't need to look. She already knew. "Evelyn!" Maggie opened the door before the knock came. Evelyn stood with her lawyer, Mr. Deaton, the same man who had handled Henry's estate. He gave a tight smile. "Morning, Mrs. Ellis." "You can come in," Maggie said, voice even. They sat at the table. Evelyn opened her sleek black handbag and laid out papers between them. Maggie noticed the lawyer didn't make eye contact with her this time. "These are just standard documents," Evelyn said, "all business. We're formalizing the property transfer and arranging for transition of legal responsibility." Maggie didn't touch the pen. "I'm still living here," she said. "You're welcome to stay for now," Evelyn replied quickly. "But we need clarity on ownership. Ethan and Lily deserve stability. I can't manage their care with things in limbo." Maggie's face remained calm, but inside her hands burned. "Do you remember what Henry wanted?" she asked. Evelyn raised a brow. "What he wanted and what's on paper aren't the same thing. He didn't exactly plan things well." Mr. Deaton cleared his throat, uneasy. "There's no reason this can't be resolved respectfully." Maggie didn't flinch. "You sure about that, Mr. Deaton?" He looked at his briefcase. "We're simply here to make things legal." Maggie pushed the pen back toward them. "I won't sign." Evelyn's smile tightened. "This isn't a negotiation." "It is now." Evelyn stood abruptly. "I've been patient. I've given you space. But I won't let you manipulate the situation. This house belongs to me. You're not his wife anymore. You're just the woman he left behind." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a soft voice came from the hallway. "Grandma?" "Ethan." He stood at the edge of the room in his socks, holding a book in one hand. Maggie turned gently toward him. "It's all right, baby. Go back upstairs." But he didn't move. He looked at Evelyn, eyes narrowed, something flickering behind his normally quiet gaze. Evelyn noticed, too. "Ethan, honey," she said, voice turning sweet. "Don't you want to come with me next weekend? We can go to that new movie. I'll get your favorite snacks." Ethan stayed silent. Then he said it. "I heard you last time you were here." Evelyn blinked. "What?" He looked at Maggie. "She said you were a useless old woman." Maggie's heart dropped, not because she didn't believe it, but because Ethan had heard it, had carried it in his small chest all this time. Evelyn's face flushed. "He's just confused." "No, I'm not," Ethan said quietly. "I heard you." Mr. Deaton stood. "I think we should give everyone space." Evelyn gathered the documents quickly. "This isn't over," she said, eyes sharp on Maggie. "I'll be back with something binding." Maggie didn't reply. She walked over to Ethan, placed her hand on his shoulder. As the door closed behind them, she knelt and looked into his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know." But his eyes were wet. She pulled him into her arms and held him there. The papers still sat on the table unsigned, and now unwanted. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was war. The porch creaked beneath Maggie's feet as she lowered herself into the wooden rocking chair. The sun was sinking low behind the trees, painting the sky in deep amber and gray. Crickets had begun their song early that evening, and for once Maggie didn't mind the noise. She held a cup of tea in her hands, untouched and cooling fast. Her thoughts spun slow and heavy. The letter, the quick claim deed, Ethan's voice saying those words. She said you were a useless old woman. It had taken everything in her not to break in front of him. She didn't notice the car until it was already pulling into the drive. Old, tan, a little rust on the sides. Pastor Thomas stepped out slowly, his long coat swaying slightly in the breeze. He didn't carry a Bible, didn't bring a sermon, just himself. Maggie stood as he walked toward the steps. "You mind some company?" he asked, voice low and warm. She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Long as you don't expect much conversation." He chuckled. "I've sat through enough church picnics to know when silence speaks louder." They sat in quiet for a few moments, the rocking chairs moving in unison. "I heard Evelyn's been around," he said eventually. Maggie didn't answer at first. Then, "She brought a lawyer." "I figured." He looked out toward the trees. "You've got people praying for you, Maggie. But prayer without truth is only half the fight." She reached behind her, pulled the letter from inside her cardigan pocket, folded twice, worn at the corners. She handed it to him. He read slowly. His eyes didn't widen, but his jaw tightened. When he finished, he folded it neatly, placed it on his lap and looked at her. Really looked at her. She knew. Maggie nodded. "All this time." "And the lawyer?" Maggie gave him the second document, the quitclaim deed. His fingers traced the signature. "Well," he said softly, "this changes things." "Does it?" Maggie asked. "I'm still here. They still think I'm weak." "They think you're quiet," he corrected. "That's not the same." She sipped her cold tea. "If I speak up, if I bring this forward, it's going to blow up the family, the town, the kids." "You didn't break this," he said gently. "You're just standing in the rubble." She looked away. "I'm tired, Thomas. I don't want to fight. I want peace." "You ever read about how Moses didn't want to go back to Egypt?" he said. She smirked faintly. "You came here to preach, after all." He laughed. "No. Just to remind you, sometimes God sends us back into hard places, not because we're strong, but because we're right." The wind shifted, lifting the edge of the letter. "I'll keep this safe," he said, tucking both documents into a leather folder. "But Maggie..." She looked at him. You're in danger if this truth comes out the wrong way. He said it without fear, just certainty. The kind of warning that doesn't come from gossip or guesswork. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. I don't care what people say about me, she whispered. But the children? I know. He stood to leave. When the time comes, you won't be alone. She nodded once, eyes on the sky now turned dark. He walked down the steps and drove off without another word. And Maggie sat alone on the porch, hands folded in her lap, heart heavy with a truth too powerful to hold in much longer. The night air was still and heavy. Maggie stood at the sink, staring into the dark window while the dishwater cooled around her hands. The house was quiet now. No laughter, no music, no footsteps. Just the hum of the old refrigerator and the ache behind her eyes. She had spent the day doing everything except thinking. Folding clothes, baking cornbread, sweeping the porch twice. But nothing kept the storm from building. Not today. Upstairs, Lily's voice called softly. Grandma? Maggie dried her hands on her apron and made her way up the creaking stairs. The children's room was dimly lit by a small lamp shaped like a moon. Ethan was already curled under his blanket, eyes closed but not asleep. Maggie could always tell the difference. Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, braiding and unbraiding the hem of her nightgown. Maggie knelt beside her. What's wrong, sugar? Lily looked at her, eyes wide and serious in a way 7-year-olds shouldn't be. Why doesn't Mommy love us anymore? The question was a whisper, but it hit like thunder. Maggie sat back slowly, trying to catch her breath. She does, Maggie lied, gently brushing Lily's cheek. She's confused right now. Lily frowned. She used to hug me tight. Now she just looks at her phone. Maggie wrapped her arms around the little girl and held her close. You are deeply loved. You hear me? Lily nodded against her chest, small fingers clutching Maggie's sleeve. I don't want to live in Mommy's house, she said. I want to stay here. Maggie kissed the top of her head. Then that's what we'll do. One day at a time. When both children were finally asleep, Maggie sat in the hallway, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. The old wood floor was cold beneath her, but she didn't care. Tears came slowly, not in sobs, but in silence. The kind of crying that doesn't ask for help, just release. She wept for her husband, for what he left unsaid. She wept for her grandchildren, caught between love and control. And she wept for herself, a woman pushed to the edge of something she never asked to fight. When the tears stopped, her chest still ached, but her breath had steadied. She stood, wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan, and walked toward the stairs. Then she saw it. Through the crack in the upstairs window across the yard, 2 figures stood near the edge of the driveway, Evelyn and Mr. Deaton. They thought no one could see them in the dark. Evelyn was pointing at something, her voice low but sharp. The lawyer shook his head. She stepped closer, too close. Maggie couldn't hear them, but their body language spoke volumes. Something wasn't right. This wasn't about grief anymore. It wasn't even about inheritance. It was about control. And Evelyn was pushing harder than ever to get it. Maggie stepped back from the window and let the curtain fall shut. She was no longer confused, no longer second-guessing. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a plan. And Maggie Ellis, tired, grieving, quiet Maggie, was not going to let it win. The rain started just after midnight. A low rumble rolled through the clouds, and soon the house was wrapped in the sound of steady thunder and soft drumming on the roof. Maggie sat alone in the den, wrapped in her old shawl, the letter from Henry open on her lap again. She had read it so many times now she could almost recite it. If you are reading this, it means I failed to protect you. She traced the words with her finger, lips pressed together. Her hands didn't shake anymore. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her, quiet at first, then rising with every memory. The way Evelyn had started visiting less after Henry got sick. The strange conversations with the lawyer that stopped when Maggie entered the room. The missing bank statements. The way Henry's name stopped appearing on the church donation lists, even though he never missed a tithe. Pieces. She hadn't wanted to see it before. Hadn't wanted to believe that the woman who had married her son, the mother of her grandchildren, could have manipulated a dying man to secure what she wanted. But the truth was no longer buried. It was in her hands, written in Henry's own trembling script. And the quit-claim deed Evelyn had signed, now hidden away with Pastor Thomas, was the final piece. Evelyn had known, the lawyer had helped, and they had counted on Maggie being too tired, too broken, too silent to fight. Lightning lit the room in a brief flash, casting long shadows across the bookshelf. Maggie didn't flinch. She was past fear. She sat up straighter in the chair. Henry had trusted Evelyn. That was his greatest mistake, and Maggie had trusted too many people to do the right thing on their own. She looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs that led to Ethan and Lily. They were still sleeping, still safe, for now. But safety was no longer guaranteed. Not in this house. Not with Evelyn circling like a hawk. Maggie stood and folded the letter slowly. She placed it back in its envelope and tucked it inside her cardigan. Then she moved to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and took out a small spiral notebook. She began to write. Dates, names, conversations, everything she could remember. She wrote for over an hour, the rain still falling steady beyond the windows. Thunder moved closer, but she didn't look up. She was documenting her war, because if Evelyn wanted a battle, she would get one, but not on paper, and not with lawyers alone, with truth, with memory, with faith. Maggie set the pen down, her hands finally still. She walked to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch as the wind whipped around her. The storm had fully arrived, not just in the sky, but in her bones. She looked out into the darkness and whispered to herself, calm and certain, I can't stay silent anymore. The lawyer's office was colder than Maggie remembered. Sterile walls, polished wood. The faint smell of lemon cleaner masked something deeper, something artificial. Maggie sat straight-backed in the leather chair, her cardigan buttoned neatly, her hands folded in her lap. To her left sat Pastor Thomas, silent but solid beside her. He said nothing, but his presence was louder than Evelyn's sharp heels pacing the floor across from them. Mr. Deaton adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I didn't have much choice, did I? Maggie said quietly. Evelyn stopped pacing. Let's not make this dramatic. We're here to finally get things resolved. Pastor Thomas gave her a look that said, we're not playing your game today. Mr. Deaton continued. We've reviewed the legal standing, and Evelyn has asked for expedited transfer of the property based on next of kin laws. Maggie interrupted him, her voice calm but unwavering. Before we go any further, I'd like to enter something into this discussion. She reached into her handbag and removed the envelope. Slowly, she laid it on the table. This is a letter from my late husband, she said, found in a locked drawer in our home. It contains direct statements about his intent, his mistrust of this process, and evidence that contradicts the version of events being presented. Mr. Deaton shifted uncomfortably. And this, she said, placing a second document beside it, is a quit-claim deed, signed and notarized, in which Evelyn voluntarily gave up her rights to the property. 2 years ago. The room went silent. Evelyn stepped forward, eyes narrowed. That's not a real document. Pastor Thomas spoke for the first time. It's legal. We had it reviewed independently, and it's been in our possession since last week. Mr. Deaton reached for the papers, quickly scanning both. His face paled. "Where did you find this?" "In my home," Maggie said, "where my husband left it, because he didn't trust you." Evelyn's voice rose. "This is manipulation. This is emotional coercion. That letter could have been forged." "No, it couldn't," Mr. Deaton muttered, eyes still on the signature. "This is his handwriting." Evelyn spun on him. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm supposed to be on the side of the law," he replied, "and this changes everything." The words hung in the air like thunder. Maggie didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply sat still as the truth unwrapped itself across the table. Evelyn stepped back, breath sharp. Her eyes darted from the papers to Maggie, then to Thomas, then to nothing at all. "This isn't over," she said under her breath. Maggie met her gaze. "I know." But for the first time, Evelyn looked shaken, not angry, not smug, but uncertain. Mr. Deaton gathered the papers carefully this time. "We'll need to pause all proceedings until further review. Mrs. Ellis, thank you for bringing this forward." Maggie stood slowly, her legs steady. She looked around the room one last time. No one clapped, no one celebrated. But something had shifted. She had spoken. She had been heard. And the silence that once swallowed her was now someone else's burden to carry. The town was different now. Subtle, but real. People still whispered, but this time the whispers followed Evelyn. At Turner's Market, Maggie noticed the shift. Mrs. Jenkins didn't look away. Mr. Rivera from the butcher counter gave her a quiet nod. The woman at checkout said, "Good to see you, Miss Ellis," and meant it. She didn't need their approval. But the absence of judgment was a kind of mercy. Evelyn had gone quiet. No visits, no texts, no more papers shoved into envelopes. Word had spread, not through gossip, but through truth. And truth had a way of echoing louder than lies, even in a town that fed off silence. On Sunday, Pastor Thomas paused before his sermon and said, "Sometimes justice takes the long way round, but it always arrives." He didn't name names, he didn't need to. After the service, Evelyn sat 2 pews back, her arms crossed, her smile brittle. No one greeted her on the way out. That was how it started. Not with lawsuits or shouts, but with eyes that no longer believed her. Maggie didn't gloat. She walked home slowly, holding Lily's hand, while Ethan kicked a pebble down the sidewalk. The sun was warm and the church bells had stopped ringing. At home, she made lunch. Fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. Ethan ate 2 helpings. Lily spilled her drink and laughed. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them sat on the front steps. The house behind them felt different too. Lighter, like it was no longer holding its breath. Lily leaned her head on Maggie's shoulder. "Are we really staying here forever now?" she asked. Maggie looked at the yard, at the trees turning amber in the early fall breeze. "Yes, baby," she said. "We're home. No one's taking us anywhere." Ethan sat quietly, then said, "You didn't yell, you didn't scream, but you still won." Maggie smiled faintly. "Not everything loud is strong, and not everything quiet is weak." He nodded, thoughtful. She looked at both of them. 2 small souls she had nearly lost, not through death, but through the slow erosion of family trust. But not anymore. Not now. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need more than what was already hers. What she had now, truth, peace, and the sound of her grandchildren laughing on the front steps, was the last word. And it was enough. The wind was softer now. Maggie stood on the porch in the early morning light, one hand around a steaming cup of coffee, the other gently resting on the shoulder of Lily, still in pajamas. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, his eyes on the horizon, his voice quiet as ever. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. The house behind them had been built on decades of memory, Some good, some bruised, but all of it was theirs, not Evelyn's, not the court's, not the town's, hers. Henry was gone, but his words had lived long enough to defend what he couldn't. In the end, that was his apology and her justice. It hadn't come in the form of apologies or legal victories. It had come in the form of peace, of waking up and not feeling afraid, of knowing the children would not be uprooted, of no longer carrying shame that was never hers. The battle had nearly taken everything, but she hadn't raised her voice. She had stood, and she had endured. Because some women don't break, they bend, quietly, silently, until the storm passes, and they're still standing when the sky clears. Lily took her hand and swung it gently. "Grandma," she said. "Yes, baby. You're really strong." Maggie smiled, not with pride, but with truth. "I am," she said, "but I didn't do it alone." She looked up at the sky, not for answers, not for signs, but simply in gratitude, for surviving, for holding on, for still believing. She took a breath that didn't hurt to breathe, and whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Have you ever survived betrayal in silence? Has your strength been mistaken for weakness? You're not alone. Share your story below. I want to hear you.